and she had lain on her back, turning in meaningless circles, singing the choruses of the pop songs she remembered. But then there was a drum of thunder, and the clouds split open, and the ball bearings began to pelt down around her, tens of thousands of them. She had swallowed as many as she could, she said, stroking the cracked trunk of the poplar tree. She didn't know why. She filled like a canvas sack and sank slowly through the layers of the ocean. Shoals of fish brushed past her, their blue and yellow scales the single brightest thing in the water. And all around her she heard that sound, the one that everybody heard, the regular pulsing of a giant heart. The stories people told about the crossing were as varied and elaborate as their 10 billion lives. So much more particular than those other stories, the ones they told about their deaths. After all, there were only so many ways a person could die. Either your heart took you, or your head took you, or it was one of the new diseases. But no one followed the same path over the crossing. Lev Paley said that he had watched his atoms break apart like marbles, roll across the universe, then gather themselves together again out of nothing at all. Hanbing Lee said that he woke inside the body of an aphid and lived an entire life in the flesh of a single peach. Graciela Cavazos would say only that she began to snow. 4 words. And smile bashfully whenever anyone pressed her for details. No 2 reports were ever the same, and yet always there was the drum-like thumping noise. Some people insisted that it never went away, that if you concentrated and didn't turn your ear from the sound, you could hear it faintly behind everything in the city. The brakes and the horns, the bells on the doors of restaurants, the clicking and slapping of different kinds of shoes on the pavement. Groups of people came together in parks or on rooftops just to listen for it, sitting quietly with their backs turned to one another. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It was like trying to keep a bird in sight as it lifted, blurred, and faded to a dot in the sky. Luka Sims had found an old mimeograph machine, his very first week in the city, and decided to use it to produce a newspaper. He stood outside the River Road coffee shop every morning, handing out the circulars he had printed. One particular issue of the L. Sims News and Speculation Sheet, or the Sim Sheet as people called it, addressed the matter of this sound. Fewer than 20% of the people Luka interviewed claimed that they could still hear it after the crossing, but almost everyone agreed that it resembled nothing so much as, could be nothing other than, the pounding of a heart. The question then was, where did it come from? It couldn't be their own hearts, for their hearts no longer beat. The old man, Mahmoud Qasim, believed that it was not the actual sound of his heart, but the remembered sound, which, because he had both heard and failed to notice it for so long, still resounded in his ears. The woman who sold bracelets by the river thought that it was the heartbeat at the center of the world, that bright, boiling place she had fallen through on her way to the city. As for this reporter, the article concluded, I hold with the majority. I have always suspected that the thumping sound we hear is the pulse of those who are still alive. The living carry us inside them, like pearls. We survive only so long as they remember us. It was an imperfect metaphor, Luka knew that, since the pearl lasts much longer than the oyster. But rule 1 in the newspaper business was that you had to meet your deadlines. He had long since given up the quest for perfection. There were more people in the city every day, and yet the city never failed to accommodate them. You might be walking down a street you had known for years, and all of a sudden you would come upon another building, Another whole block. Carson McCaffrian, who drove one of the sleek black taxis that roamed the streets, had to redraw his maps once a week. 20, 30, 50 times a day, he would pick up a fare who had only recently arrived in the city and have to deliver him somewhere Carson, had never heard of. They came from Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. They came from churning metropolises and from small islands in the middle of the ocean. That was what the living did. They died. There was an ancient street musician who began playing in the red brick district as soon as he reached the city, making slow, sad breaths with his accordion. There was a jeweler, a young man, who set up shop at the corner of Maple and Christopher Streets and sold diamonds that he mounted on silver pendants. Jessica Offert had operated her own jewelry shop on the same corner for more than 30 years. But she didn't seem to resent the man, and in fact brought him a mug of fresh black coffee every morning, exchanging gossip as she drank with him in his front room. What surprised her was how young he was, how young so many of the dead were these days. Great numbers of them were no more than children, who clattered around on skateboards or went racing past her window on their way to the playground. One, a boy with a strawberry discoloration on his cheek, liked to pretend that the rocking horses he tossed himself around on were real horses, the horses he had brushed and fed on his farm before they were killed in the bombing. Another liked to swoop down the slide over and over again, hammering his feet into the gravel as he thought about his parents and his 2 older brothers, who were still alive. He had watched them lift free of the same illness that had slowly sucked him under. He didn't like to talk about it. This was during a war, though it was difficult for any of them to remember which one. Occasionally, one of the dead, someone who had just completed the crossing, would mistake the city for heaven. It was a misunderstanding that never persisted for long. What kind of heaven had the blasting sound of garbage trucks in the morning, and chewing gum on the pavement, and the smell of fish rotting by the river? What kind of hell, for that matter, had bakeries and dogwood trees and perfect blue days that made the hairs on the back of your neck rise on end? No, the city was not heaven, and it was not hell, and it was certainly not the world. It stood to reason, then, that it had to be something else. More and more people came to adopt the theory that it was an extension of life itself, a sort of outer room, and that they would remain there only so long as they endured in living memory. When the last person who had actually known them died, they would pass over into whatever came next. It was true that most of the city's occupants went away after 60 or 70 years, and while this did not prove the theory, it certainly served to nourish it. There were stories of men and women who had been in the city much longer, for centuries and more. But there were always such stories, in every time and place, and who knew whether to believe them? Every neighborhood had its gathering spot, a place where people could come together to trade news of the other world. There was the Colonnade in the Monument District, and the one and only tavern in the Warehouse District. And right next to the greenhouse, in the center of the Conservatory District, was Andrei Kolotozov's Russian tea room. Kolotozov poured the tea he brewed from a brass samovar into small porcelain cups that he served on polished wooden platters. His wife and daughter had died a few weeks before he did, in an accident involving a landmine they had rooted up out of the family garden. He was watching through the kitchen window when it happened. His wife's spade struck a jagged hunk of metal, so cankered with rust from its century underground that he didn't realize what it was until it exploded. 2 weeks later, when he put the razor to his throat, it was with the hope that he would be reunited with his family in heaven. And sure enough,